We see adults completing degrees, building careers, and managing complex professional lives. Yet these same high-functioning individuals will execute a sudden, cold severance from their parents, using a vocabulary that is consistent across different families and continents. Structural neuroimaging shows that a highly salient digital environment can physically reorganize the brain's cortical map. When this environment intercepts development, it builds the neurological system around digital rewards rather than human experience. We can map this process using a physical model. Hold up your hand. Your wrist represents the spinal cord, and your palm is the brainstem, responsible for basic survival functions. Fold your thumb inward to represent the limbic system, the emotional center. Now wrap your fingers over the thumb. This is the cerebral cortex, which keeps emotions regulated. For the cohort born between 1985 and 2004, this structure formed through face-to-face interaction. Without digital interference, physical touch and eye contact wired the logic brain to regulate the emotional brain, establishing a functioning biological attachment. During puberty, the thinking brain temporarily disconnects as the prefrontal cortex undergoes a major rebuild. The fingers lift up, leaving the emotional brain exposed and highly reactive. Previous generations experienced this phase through real-world friction. Arguments with parents and siblings happened in person, creating a feedback loop that eventually forced the thinking brain to reconnect and regulate the emotional center. This cohort experienced that developmental window differently. Their exposed emotional brains were intercepted by an anonymous digital space, an environment with no physical friction, no social cues, and no exit. Digital communities provided immediate validation for every adolescent grievance. This constant, salient feedback became a more powerful stimulus than the presence of a parent, training the limbic system to look to the screen for its primary rewards. Because the screen rewarded a state of emotional reactivity, the environment never required the logic brain to close back down. The emotional brain bypassed the family and bonded its survival instincts to the internet. We see high levels of professional competence existing alongside a total lack of relational empathy because the brain is not failing as a single unit, it is dividing. The top knuckles of your lifted fingers represent the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This region governs planning and logic. Exams, deadlines, and workplace tasks provided the structured input necessary for this center to wire correctly. The underside of the fingertips represents the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is the contact point between the thinking brain and the feeling brain. It weighs relational costs and processes empathy before a decision is made. Relational processing requires human experience to grow. Because digital communities provided pre-packaged narratives rather than interpersonal conflict, this region never had to compute the consequences of its actions. Without that input, the empathy center remained underactivated. Lift your own fingers to simulate this gap and point to the underside of your fingertips. This area is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It is the specific biological region where relational empathy fails during parental discard. When a parent reaches out with letters or texts, they are attempting to repair a bond. However, in this state, the outreach becomes raw material that deepens the severance. When the emotional brain receives the message, it cannot process it as love. The limbic system reacts to the parent as a survival threat. They take this threat back to their digital community. Validation provides dopamine, reinforcing the dependence. The parent's outreach becomes fuel. Diffusion imaging in internet-dependent populations reveals a measurable reduction in connectivity between the planning brain and the empathy center. In a healthy brain, these regions communicate to regulate behavior. In a dependent brain, that pathway is weakened. Parental discard is the visible result of this physical breakdown. The planning brain executes the severance, the emotional brain perceives the parent as a threat, and the empathy center remains too quiet to stop the process.